Good day, class. I am Miss Mary Joy Cañada, and today we are going to tackle about the phrases, clauses, and sentences. But before that, do you have any idea of what phrases, clauses, and sentences are? So now, let's begin our discussion.
So let's tackle about praise. A phrase is a group of words that function together as a single unit within a sentence. Praise have three kinds: the noun praise, the verb praise, and prepositional praise. A noun praise. So a noun praise is a praise that has a noun as its head or performs the same functions as a noun. So for example, Brian's birthday is on August 31. So in this sentence, the subject is the noun praise, which is Brian's birthday. There are two functions of a noun praise. So the first is as a subject of a verb. For example, the tall tree fell down in the storm. So in this sentence, the phrase the tall tree functions as the subject of the verb, which is fell, and it is therefore a noun praise. So the second functions of a noun is as object of a verb. For example, I wish to see the manager. So in this sentence, the phrase to see the manager functions as the subject of the verb wish, and it is therefore a noun praise. So the second kind of praise is a verb praise. So a verb praise is a part of a sentence containing the verb and any direct or indirect object, but not the subject. For example, Jane could have worked on that project today. So in this sentence, the verb praise is could have worked, while in the second sentence is going. So let's move on to the last kind of praise, which is prepositional praise. So prepositional praise begins with a preposition and ends with a noun or a pronoun called the object of the preposition. Remember that a preposition is a word placed before a noun or pronoun to show its relation to some other words. For example, the cat scratched his hand with fear. So, the preposition praise is with fear, which is modifies the cat. Now that we're done with praises, let's move on with clauses. A clauses is a group of related words containing a subject and a verb. There are two types of clauses. The first one is main or independent clause. Main or independent clause is a clause that expresses a complete thought and can stand as a sentence. For example, as I sat on the bamboo bench, Mother stared at me. As you can see that there are two clauses in the sentence. The first is I sat on the bamboo bench, and the second is Mother stared at me. The second clause is the independent clause because it has a complete thought. Whether we remove the first clause, the thought is still complete. So let's move on to the subordinate or dependent clause. A subordinate or dependent clause is a clause which does not express a complete thought and depends on another clause or main clause. To express a complete thought may function as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb in a sentence. For example, although I am innocent, something bothered me. So the subordinate or dependent clause is although I am innocent. The same as our example in independent clause. There are two clauses in the sentence. The first one is our dependent clause because if we remove the second clause, the thought is not complete. So there are three functions of a subordinate clause. So the first function is a noun clause. A noun clause is a dependent clause that functions as a noun in a sentence. Perform same function like a noun in a sentence. It starts with words that, what, whatever, who, whom, whoever, whomever, where, which, or whether. For example, whatever you discover will help you in the future. So the noun clause in the example is whatever you discover because it functions as a noun and it begins with whatever. So the second function is the adjective clause. Adjective clause is a dependent clause that functions as an adjective in a sentence, modifies or describes a noun or pronoun, and always precedes the noun it modifies. It usually begins with a relative pronoun which connects them to the word they describe, such as that, where, when, who, whom, whose, which, and why. For example, the reference which I like is helpful in the test. The adjective clause in the example is which I like because it modifies the noun which is the reference and begins with the word which. So the last function is the adverb clause. Adverb clause is a dependent clause that functions as an adverb in a sentence that modifies a verb, adjective, or other adverb clauses. It describes the situation in the main clause in terms of time, frequency, how often, cause and effect, contrast, condition, and intensity to what extent. The subordinating conjunctions used for adverb clauses are as follows: in time, when, whenever, since, until, before, after while, as, by the time, as soon as. In cause and effect, because, since, now, that, as long as, so, and so that. In contrast, although, ever, whereas, while, and thought. And in condition, if, unless, only if, whether or not, even if, providing or provided that, in case. For example, don't go before she comes. The adverb clause in the example is before she comes because it modifies the verb which is don't go in terms of time. So another example is if you study harder, you can make it. In example number 2, the adverb clause is if you study harder because it modifies the verb you can make it in terms of condition. So let's move on to the last, which is the sentences. A group of words that expresses a complete thought is a sentence. It is composed of two parts: the subject that can either be a noun or a pronoun, which is talked about in the sentence, and the predicate that can be a verb or a verb phrase, which tells about the action or quality of the subject. It begins with a capital letter and ends with a punctuation mark. For example, tall trees cover the forest. In the example given, the subject, tall trees, which is a noun, and the predicate is cover the forest, which is a verb phrase that tells about the quality of the subject. So there are three kinds of sentences according to their structures. So the first is the simple sentence. A simple sentence has only one pair of subject predicate, but either the subject or the predicate can sometimes be compound. For example, Tina is a good friend. In the example, there is only one subject, which is Tina, and one predicate, which is a good friend. So let's move on to the second kind, which is compound sentence. A compound sentence has two or more independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. For example, Alan helps his father cooks a special dish and he fixes all the cabinets. In the example, there are two independent clauses. The first is Alan helps his father cook a special dish. And the second one is he fixes all the cabinets. These two independent clauses is joined by the conjunction and. So the last kind of sentences according to their structures is the complex sentence. A complex sentence has two clauses, independent and dependent clauses. A dependent clause cannot make sense by itself because it begins with a subordinate conjunction. For example, when I was young, I used to play ball with my brother. In the example, the clause when I was young is the dependent clause, and the other clause, which is I used to play ball with my brother, is the independent clause. In addition to classification by the number and types of clauses it contains, a sentence may be classified by function as declarative, interrogative, imperative, or exclamatory. A declarative sentence states an idea and ends with a period. For example, the sky is blue. So the sentence gives an idea about the sky. An interrogative sentence asks a question and ends with a question mark. For example, where is the old town hall? The sentence asks the location of the town hall and it ends with a question mark. An imperative sentence gives an order or a direction and ends with a period or an exclamation mark. For example, stop. The sentence gives an order to stop what he or she is doing and it ends with an exclamation point. So the last is exclamatory sentence. An exclamatory sentence expresses strong or sudden emotion and ends with an exclamation mark. For example, how tired I am. The sentence expresses the tiredness he or she has.